Now, they say New York is the city that never sleeps, but it's also the city that never stops dreaming, whether those are good dreams or nightmares. Beneath the grid of its streets and the glare of its neon, there is another map, another layer of reality. It's a place woven from forgotten histories, whispered legends, and the quiet, desperate wishes of 8 million souls. We walk these streets every day, our heads down, our minds on the next train or the next deadline. We see the bodega cat, the rooftop garden, the musician in the subway, and we see only what's on the surface. We forget that in a city this old, this dense, this full of life and love and loss, the mundane is often just a thin veil. But sometimes, on the foggiest nights or in the quietest moments, that veil tears. A crack appears in the ordinary, and something strange slips through. A melody summons a ghost, a toll booth demands an impossible price, a gargoyle remembers its ancient duty. These are the stories that happen in the corners of your eye, in the spaces between the skyscrapers, in the heart of a city that holds its magic close. These are New York's strange tales. Look closely. The city is telling them all the time. The acoustics of the Astor Place station were a cruel joke. Down on the main platform, where Elara spent most of her days, the screech of the 6th train arriving was a physical blow, a metallic shriek that ripped through the most delicate arpeggio. The rumble of its departure vibrated up through the soles of her worn boots, making her teeth ache. Yet the scattered dollars and coins in her open flute case were the only things keeping a queen's eviction notice at bay. The sound was her torment, but the station was her lifeline. There was one spot, however, that was different. A forgotten, sealed-off lower platform, accessible only through a rusted gate she'd learned Jimmy open. Down there, the air was still and cool, thick with the scent of damp earth and ozone. The tile was grimy, the old advertisements faded into ghostly suggestions of forgotten brands, but the silence was a sacred thing. And the acoustics, they were perfect. When Elara played her silver flute down there, a single note could hang in the air like a spun glass ornament, shimmering and pure, before slowly dissolving into the dark. It was on one of those late, desperate nights that it first happened. She'd made a miserable $7 and change, not even enough for a decent meal at McDonald's. Defeated, she retreated to her subterranean concert hall, not for money, but for solace. She chose an old, melancholic tune she'd found in a tattered vaudeville songbook, a lament for a lost love. The melody, full of sorrow and sweet regret, filled the cavernous space. As she played, the air grew heavy and cold, the kind of deep, biting chill that had nothing to do with the weather. A flicker of movement in the corner of her eye made her falter. She lowered her flute, her heart thudding against her ribs. Standing at the far end of the platform, bathed in the faint spectral glow of the emergency lighting, was a woman. She was translucent, her form wavering like a heat haze, and she wore a feathered hat and a long beaded dress that shimmered with an internal pearlescent light. Elara's breath caught in her throat. Before she could run, another figure materialized beside the woman, a man in a boater hat and striped jacket holding a cane. Then another, and another. A crowd of them, all shimmering and silent, all dressed in the forgotten fashions of a bygone era. They weren't threatening. They were watching her, their ghostly faces filled with a profound and sorrowful attention. They were an audience. Hesitantly, she raised the flute to her lips again and continued the song. As the music flowed, they swayed. A woman in a sequin dress, who must have been a dancer, began to move through a slow, graceful box step. An old man with a magnificent handlebar mustache wept silent, shimmering tears. When the final note faded, they remained for a moment, then slowly, respectfully dissolved back into the shadows, leaving Elara alone, trembling in the profound silence. The next night she returned, armed with a book of opera arias. She played Puccini, and the spirits that appeared were grander, more dramatic. Women in velvet gowns with tragic expressions, men in tailcoats clutching their chests. She switched to a lively Irish jig, and the platform filled with laughing, stomping apparitions in newsboy caps and worn work shirts. She was their conductor, their maestro. She could summon them, command their moods, give them a fleeting echo of the lives they had lost. They began to leave her gifts. After a night of soaring arias, she found a tarnished silver hairpin on the grimy platform floor. After a raucous set of show tunes, a perfectly preserved playbill from a 1912 production at the Palace Theater appeared. She sold the items at a pawn shop, the strange, guilt-tinged money a welcome relief. She was no longer just surviving. She was the secret curator of a spectral symphony. But not all spirits were content to merely listen. One night, a new presence made itself known. He was different from the others, sharper, more solid, his form coalescing from the darkness with an arrogant swagger. He wore a perfectly tailored suit and had a cruel, handsome face. Unlike the wistful performers, his eyes held a cold, calculating intelligence. "You have a gift," a voice whispered in her mind, smooth as silk but cold as a tombstone. It was him. He didn't need her music to manifest. He introduced himself as Adam Lynch, a name that echoed in the dusty halls of theater history. A producer, a magnate, a kingmaker from the roaring 20s who had been ruined by a rival. "They listen to you, little songbird," he hissed in her thoughts, his spectral form gliding closer. "But you play them sad little songs, trifles. They have more than just memories. They have rage. Play them something with teeth." He preyed on her ambition, her poverty. He spoke of sold-out concert halls, of fame, of a world that would finally recognize her genius. All she had to do was channel the anger of the spirits, to conduct their bitterness instead of their sorrow. He wanted her to compose a new symphony, a symphony of revenge. His rival's family, he explained, still owned the Majestic Theater on Broadway. He wanted to give them a new opening night they would never forget. Desperate and seduced by his promises, Ilara agreed. That night, she didn't play the gentle laments or joyful jigs. She played a discordant, furious piece of her own composition, a melody filled with jagged notes and unresolved tension. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The spirits that rose from the shadows were not the gentle performers she knew. They were twisted with rage, their faces contorted into masks of fury. The air crackled with malevolent energy. Adam stood among them, a dark general rallying his troops, a triumphant sneer on his face. "Now," he commanded, and the spectral mob surged, not fading, but flowing like a river up the stairs, towards the street, towards the living world. Ilara felt a wave of nausea. Lights in the station flickered and burst. A wave of supernatural cold washed over her. She could feel their collective hatred, a force strong enough to interact with the physical world. She saw a vision of what they would do, the panic, the terror, the cold touch of a ghost on a living heart. This wasn't a concert. This was an assault. "No," she whispered, her flute feeling like a lead weight in her hands. Adam turned his cold eyes on her. "Play, conductor. Finish the symphony." But she couldn't. Dropping the anger melody, her fingers fumbling on the flute, she began to play something else. It was the first song she had ever learned, a simple, gentle lullaby her mother used to sing to her. It was a melody of pure love and peace, of safety and rest. The sound, clear and pure, cut through the cacophony of spectral rage. It was anathema to them. To Adam, it was like poison. He recoiled, his ghostly form flickering violently. "What is this filth? Stop it!" But the other spirits heard it too. The dancer in the sequin dress, the old man with the mustache, the tragic opera singers. They stopped their vengeful march. The lullaby spoke to the part of them that didn't want revenge, the part that simply yearned for peace. Their sorrow, a force far more profound and powerful than Adam's shallow anger, turned on him. They swarmed, their collective grief a tidal wave of spectral energy that engulfed his rage. He let out a final, silent scream, and his sharp, solid form was torn apart, dissolving into nothingness. One by one, the other ghosts turned to Ilara. They didn't smile, but she could feel their gratitude. As the last sweet note of the lullaby faded into the deep silence of the subway platform, they dissolved, leaving her alone once more. Slowly, Ilara packed her flute. On the ground, she saw the antique playbill she had been meaning to sell. She left it on the platform, a final offering. She walked up the stairs and out of the station, emerging into the gray light of a New York dawn. The eviction notice was still waiting in her apartment. Her wallet was still empty. But as she walked through the waking city, she felt a different kind of wealth. She understood the power of her music was not to command the past, but to grant it peace. And in the quiet morning air, that felt like enough. The bodega on the corner of Avenue B and East 4th Street smelled of stale coffee, cheap incense, and dust, a fine gray powder that seemed to coat everything, from the sun-bleached boxes of cereal to the perpetually sleeping cat on the counter. His name, according to a faded handwritten sign taped to the lottery machine, was Anubis. He was a scrawny tabby with one milky blind eye and one emerald green one that seemed to see more than it should. Lenny saw the cat every day. Lenny was a graphic designer, which was a polite way of saying he spent 12 hours a day hunched over a laptop, churning out uninspired logos for soul-crushing startups. His life felt like the bodega's dust, a settled layer of disappointment covering everything. Today was particularly bad. He had lost his one promising freelance client, his rent was 3 days late, and his last $5 were about to be converted into a lukewarm coffee and a stale pastry. As Mr. Kim, the bodega's owner, rang him up, Lenny fumbled with his keys, pulling them from his pocket. A small silver charm, a tiny, intricately detailed feather his grandmother had given him, snagged on the fabric and snapped off its ring. It skittered across the grimy counter. "Ah, hell," Lenny muttered, the final insult on a day of 1,000 paper cuts. He was too tired to even care. He pushed the charm aside with his finger. "Keep it," he said to Mr. Kim, who merely grunted. As Lenny turned to leave, he saw Anubis stir. The cat rose, stretched with an arthritic slowness, and padded over to the silver feather. He sniffed it delicately. Then he looked directly at Lenny, and with a deliberateness that was almost human, blinked his good green eye. Lenny shrugged and walked out, the bitter coffee doing little to improve his mood. He was halfway down the block when he saw it, lying in the gutter, a fountain pen. It wasn't just any pen. It was a vintage Mont Blanc, its black resin gleaming, the gold nib catching the weak afternoon sun. As a hobbyist collector of such things, Lenny knew it was worth hundreds, maybe more. His heart hammered. He snatched it up, a sudden dizzying wave of pure luck washing over him. The day wasn't a total loss after all. That night, high on his good fortune, he decided to finish a personal project, a beautiful calligraphy piece he'd been working on for weeks. He inked the Mont Blanc, marveling at its perfect weight and balance. He was on the final flourishing stroke when the pen's reservoir suddenly, inexplicably ruptured. A great black tide of permanent ink flooded across the pristine paper, obliterating his work in a single ruinous blot. The balance had been struck. A cold dread tickled down Lenny's spine. The charm, the cat's slow blink, the pen, the ink. It was an insane, impossible connection, but it felt true in his gut. The next day, he went back to the bodega, his mind racing. He needed to test his theory. He bought a bottle of water, and as Mr. Kim looked away, he slipped a small, forgotten photograph from his wallet, a picture of him and an old college friend laughing on a beach, and left it on the counter. Anubis, as if on cue, padded over, sniffed the photo, and gave his slow, knowing blink. Lenny spent the rest of the day in a state of high anxiety. At 4 p.m., his phone rang. It was the friend, indeed, from the photograph, a man he hadn't spoken to in 5 years. He was in town, working for a major ad agency, and had heard Lenny was a designer. He wanted to know if Lenny was free to grab a drink and talk about a possible job opening. Lenny was ecstatic, his wild theory seemingly confirmed. He threw on his best suit and practically ran out the door. So focused was he on the life-changing opportunity ahead that he didn't see the crack in the pavement. He tripped, sprawling onto the sidewalk and tearing a massive, unfixable hole in the knee of his suit pants. He missed the meeting, the good fortune, and its price. It became an obsession to Lenny, a dangerous game. He learned the rules through trial and error. The offering had to be personal, imbued with some kind of memory or meaning. The more sentimental the object, the greater the fortune, and the more ironic the misfortune. He offered a ticket stub from the first concert he ever attended. Anubis blinked. That afternoon, he found a $50 bill blowing down the street. The price? Later that night, his upstairs neighbor's plumbing burst, flooding his apartment and ruining one of his favorite art books, worth almost exactly $50. Next, he offered a single, lonely cufflink from a pair his father had given him. Anubis blinked. A speeding taxi ran a red light and screeched to a halt, its bumper inches from his legs. He was saved from serious injury. The price? The taxi's tires hit a deep, foul-smelling puddle, drenching him from head to toe in putrid street water. The trades were clever, almost witty in their cruelty. They were keeping him afloat, but just barely. He was never getting ahead, just endlessly treading water in a sea of balanced fate. Meanwhile, a second eviction notice had arrived. He needed more than a found $50 bill or a near miss with a taxi. He needed a miracle. He needed to make a real sacrifice. He knew what he had to do. He went to the small, locked box where he kept his few valuables. He took out his grandfather's watch. It was a simple, elegant timepiece from the 1950s, its leather strap worn smooth, its ticking a faint, steady heartbeat. It was the only thing of real value he owned, both monetarily and sentimentally. It was the memory of his grandfather's hand in his, the story of a man who had built a life from nothing. His hands trembled as he walked to the bodega. The evening rush was over, and the store was quiet. Anubis was sleeping, a twitching bundle of fur. Lenny placed the watch on the counter. The soft ticking seemed to fill the entire store. Anubis's green eye snapped open. He didn't just sniff the offering, he circled it, his body low to the ground like a predator. He nudged it with his head. The air grew thick and heavy. Finally, he stopped and stared at Lenny, his gaze piercing, ancient. He blinked, a gesture so slow and deliberate it felt like the closing of a tomb. Lenny left the bodega feeling hollowed out, terrified. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, his phone rang. It was the American Institute of Design, a passion project he had submitted to their annual competition months ago. A project he had completely forgotten about had won the grand prize. The prize? $25,000. Lenny dropped the phone, a wild, disbelieving laugh bubbling up from his chest. It was more than enough. It was a new life. He could pay his rent, buy a new computer, rent a small studio space. He could finally be the artist he was meant to be. The watch, his grandfather's memory, had bought him a future. He was dancing around his small apartment, the prize notification email glowing on his laptop screen, when the phone rang again. It was his sister, her voice choked with tears. "Lenny," she sobbed. "It was Mom and Dad's house." "What? What's wrong?" "There was a fire," she wept. "A freak electrical thing. It's... Lenny, it's all gone. Everything." The music in his apartment died. The glowing screen seemed to mock him. The house he grew up in, the attic full of photo albums, the pencil marks on the doorframe tracking his height, every shared memory, every ghost of his childhood turned to ash. The greatest fortune of his life, paid for with a loss so profound it stole the air from his lungs. Days later, numb and hollow, he walked back into the bodega one last time. Mr. Kim was wiping the counter. Anubis was curled up on a stack of newspapers, looking for all the world like a normal, one-eyed cat. Lenny bought a coffee. He saw the glint of his grandfather's watch tucked away behind the register, its steady ticking, now a part of the bodega's quiet hum. He looked at the cat, who blinked his green eye, not with cosmic knowledge, but with the simple, sleepy indifference of an animal. Leo finally understood. Anubis wasn't a demon cat or a god. He was a fulcrum, a balancing point. The universe didn't care about good or bad, only equilibrium. For every gain, a loss. For every joy, a sorrow. He had asked for his life to be changed, and the cat had simply forwarded the bill. Bernie Crawford's life was a study in straight lines. From his apartment in Brooklyn Heights, he took the same train to the same accounting firm in Manhattan, walked the same 4 blocks to his cubicle, and at precisely 5:30 p.m. began the journey in reverse. The highlight of his commute was the drive home over the Brooklyn Bridge. The familiar Gothic arches, a comforting frame for the city's predictable skyline. He was a man who believed in ledgers and balance sheets, not ghost stories. So when his colleagues spoke in hushed, amused tones about the phantom toll booth that supposedly appeared on the bridge in the fog, he would just shake his head and smile a thin, dismissive smile. One Tuesday in November, the weather broke. A thick, unnatural fog, the color of wet wool, rolled in from the sea, swallowing the city whole. By the time Bernie got to his car, visibility was down to a few feet. The drive over the bridge was a disorienting crawl. The familiar lights of Manhattan vanished behind him, and the comforting glow of Brooklyn failed to appear ahead. There was only the damp, gray nothingness, the hum of his tires on the wet pavement, and the anxious thumping of his own heart. And then a light, a single weak yellow lantern hanging in the dead center of the bridge. As he crept closer, the light resolved into a shape, a small, impossibly old-fashioned toll booth, complete with a striped barrier arm blocking his lane. Bernie slammed on his brakes, his car skidding slightly. His first thought was irritation. Some ridiculous art installation, probably. A figure leaned out of the booth's window. He was a silhouette, his features lost in the deep shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. "Toll," the figure said, his voice a dry rustle like dead leaves skittering across pavement. "This is a joke, right?" Bernie said, rolling down his window. "The Brooklyn Bridge has been free forever." "Not this crossing," the collector rasped. "The toll isn't money. To pass into Brooklyn, you must give me a happy memory." Bernie stared. He was too tired for this crap. He tried to peer around the booth, but the fog was a solid, impenetrable wall. He honked his horn, but only emitted a pathetic, swallowed sound. There was no going forward, and the thought of reversing back into the blinding fog was terrifying. He was trapped. "Fine," he snapped, deciding to play along with the lunatic's game. "Whatever. Let's see, a happy memory. Last week, I had a fantastic slice of pepperoni pizza from that place on Montague. The cheese pull was epic. There, you happy?" He focused on the memory, the savory taste, the warmth of the crust. The collector extended a gloved hand, palm up. Bernie felt a strange, cold plucking sensation in the back of his mind, a brief, dizzying emptiness. "Paid," the collector whispered. The barrier arm lifted with a silent, ghostly grace. Shaken, Bernie sped away. As he drove, he tried to recall the pizza. He knew he had eaten it, but now the specifics were gone. The taste, the name of the pizzeria, the satisfaction, it was suddenly a blank space, a neatly erased entry in his mental ledger. He arrived home deeply unsettled, the encounter clinging to him like the damp chill of the fog. The next night, the fog was back, thicker and more menacing than before, and so was the toll booth. This time, Bernie felt a knot of real fear tighten in his stomach. "A happy memory, please," the collector rasped, his shadowy form as still as a statue. Bernie refused to give up anything important. "My high school graduation," he offered, a memory already faded by time. Again, the cold plucking sensation. As he drove off, he tried to picture his younger self in a cap and gown, but now the image just wouldn't form. Another page had been torn from his past. The fog persisted for a week. Every night, the toll booth was there, waiting. Every night, Bernie paid with a piece of his past. He gave up his 5th birthday party, the feeling of the sun on his face during a long-ago beach vacation, the pride of learning how to ride a 2-wheel bike without training wheels. Each transaction left him a little more hollowed out, a little more disconnected from the man he used to be. His wife, Sarah, noticed the change. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she asked one evening, her brow furrowed with concern. "You seem distant. I was telling that story about our disastrous trip to the Poconos, and you looked at me like you'd never heard it before." He just couldn't bring himself to tell her that he hadn't. The memory was gone, sacrificed for passage across a haunted bridge. The shared history that was the bedrock of their marriage was becoming, for him, a landscape of sinkholes. The breaking point came on a Friday. The fog was a suffocating blanket, and a cold, driving rain lashed against his windshield. He and Sarah had had a terrible fight that morning, born from his strange, emotional detachment. Her hurt, confused face was seared into his mind. He drove onto the bridge with a sense of impending doom. The The tollbooth's lantern was his only landmark in the swirling gray. He pulled up, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "A happy memory, please," the collector's voice commanded. Bernie's mind raced, scrambling for something, anything he could afford to lose. But his past felt like a plundered vault. The small, disposable joys were gone. All that remained were the pillars of his life, the memories that defined him. And the happiest, most sacred of them all rose in his mind, bright and clear. His wedding day. He saw Sarah walking down the aisle, her smile a supernova that had reordered his entire universe. It was the memory that kept him warm. It was the memory that was the foundation of everything he was. The collector seemed to sense it, leaning slightly out of the booth. "That one," he whispered, a hungry eagerness in his tone. "A worthy price." "No," Bernie said, his voice trembling. "Not that one. Never that one." "There's little else of value left in you," the collector hissed. "Pay the toll or remain on this bridge for eternity, a ghost between two shores." Staring into the abyss of the collector's shadow, Bernie felt a surge of defiance. He would not let this creature take his love from him. If it fed on happiness, he would offer it poison. "You want a memory?" Bernie said, his voice gaining strength. He closed his eyes and focused, not on his wedding, but on the fight from that morning. He summoned the bitter words, the slam of the door, the raw, ugly pain of hurting the person he loved the most. He held the wretched memory in his mind and pushed it forward. "Take this one. It's all you're getting from me." The collector recoiled as if he'd been burned. "That is not the toll. I take joy, not sorrow." "You'll take what I give you," Bernie snarled, pushing the memory out with all his will. The painful memory was ripped from him, but the sensation was entirely different. It wasn't a cold plug, but a hot, cathartic release. The anger vanished, the guilt evaporated, the memory of the fight was gone, but the vast, overwhelming love for his wife that existed beneath it remained, purified and powerful. The toll booth began to flicker and distort. The collector let out a shriek, not of a voice, but of twisting metal and shattering glass. The lantern exploded in a shower of dull yellow sparks, and the entire structure dissolved, melting away into the fog like a bad dream. The bridge ahead was suddenly clear, the lights of Brooklyn beckoning him home. Bernie didn't remember driving the rest of the way. He burst into his apartment to find Sarah sitting on the sofa, her face streaked with tears. He couldn't remember the specifics of their argument, only that he had been the cause of her pain. "I'm sorry," he whispered, rushing to her, pulling her into his arms. "I'm so sorry. I got lost, but I'm back now." She didn't understand his frantic talk of a toll booth that ate memories, but she felt the desperate sincerity in his embrace. She felt the change in him, a return of the warmth she'd so sorely missed. The fog was gone the next morning. Bernie's past was still a fractured thing, a story with missing chapters. But as he and Sarah sat at the kitchen table, holding hands in the bright morning sun, he knew it didn't matter. The toll booth had taken his history, but in his defiance, he had saved his future. And they had all the time in the world to fill it with new memories together. Clara was a professional observer. As a freelance journalist, she made a living watching the city from the periphery, taking notes on a world she never quite felt a part of. Her days were spent in a lonely rhythm of coffee shops and libraries, so when the Gilded Horn appeared overnight in a narrow midtown alley she'd already walked 1,000 times, it felt like a secret revealed just for her. It was a perfect replica of an automat from a time gone by, a gleaming time capsule of polished chrome, dark wood, and intricate tilework. A wall of small, glass-frosted compartments displayed a jewel-box array of food, glistening slices of cherry pie, neat sandwiches on rye, steaming macaroni and cheese in ceramic crocks. It was charming, nostalgic, and for Clara, a welcome new place to be alone, together with strangers. She slipped 2 quarters into a slot, the clink of the coins a satisfying analog sound. She turned the little silver knob for a slice of lemon meringue pie. As the tiny door clicked open and she reached inside, a voice, soft as a sigh, brushed against her ear. The woman in the blue coat. She tells her husband she's at yoga class. Clara froze, her fingers hovering over the plate. She glanced around. No one was near her. The other patrons were lost in their own worlds. She snatched the pie, her heart thumping, and retreated to a small table. Across the room, a woman in a stylish blue coat was laughing into her phone. Clara dismissed the voice as a trick of acoustics, a stray bit of conversation bouncing off the tile. But she couldn't help but watch the woman. A seed of curiosity had been planted. The next day, she returned. She had to know. This time, she chose the macaroni and cheese. As her fingers closed around the warm crock, the whisper came again, clearer this time, intimate and conspiratorial. The man reading the newspaper. His son thinks he's a hero, but he just got fired for embezzlement. Clara's gaze shot to a distinguished-looking man with silver hair, his face hidden behind the Wall Street Journal. A wave of vertigo washed over her. This was no auditory illusion. The machine was talking to her. It was telling her secrets. It became an addiction. Every day, Clara would visit the Gilded Horn, her quarters buying her not just a meal, but a sliver of someone else's hidden life. The secrets were a heady cocktail of the mundane and the profound. She learned that the young waitress was secretly a gifted poet, that the old man who always had the meatloaf was a decorated war hero, that a pawnbroker in a tailored suit was terrified of birds. The knowledge was intoxicating. It transformed her from a passive observer into a secret omniscient. Her loneliness began to feel like power. The city was no longer a collection of anonymous faces. It was a web of stories, and she was the only one who could see the threads. She started to recognize other regulars, a silent congregation of listeners. They never spoke, but they would exchange knowing, furtive glances as they retrieved their food, a shared, unspoken acknowledgement of the magic they were all partaking in. The automat became a silent theater of paranoia, each patron a potential subject, each whisper a new act in the play. Then, the tone of the whispers began to change. They grew darker, sharper, the edges laced with malice. One afternoon, as she reached for a deviled egg, the voice was cold and urgent. The man by the window, the one with the briefcase. He's meeting someone here to plan a robbery. The security guard at the diamond exchange. Clara's blood ran cold. She looked over at a nondescript man in a rumpled suit, nervously tapping his fingers on a worn leather briefcase. This wasn't just harmless gossip about yoga classes or secret phobias. This was dangerous. A heavy weight of responsibility settled on her. What was she supposed to do? Call the police? Tell them a ghost in a vending machine told her a crime was about to happen? They'd think she was insane. She couldn't stop staring at the man. He seemed so ordinary, so harmless. But the whispers had never been wrong. After a few minutes, he seemed to feel her gaze. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. He gave a slight, polite smile. Clara quickly looked away, her face burning. She felt like a spy whose cover had just been blown. She stayed for another hour, paralyzed by indecision. The man eventually got up and left, his briefcase in hand, and the world didn't end. Clara felt a wave of relief, telling herself it must have been a mistake, a flaw in the magic. But the seed of fear had been planted alongside the curiosity. The final, fatal whisper came a week later. She was feeling particularly low. A major article she had pitched had been rejected, and the familiar loneliness was creeping back in. She sought the comfort of the Gilded Horn, the false intimacy of its secrets. She chose a simple cup of coffee. As she opened the little glass door, the whisper came, but this time it wasn't about someone else. A man 2 windows down from her, a young student with a backpack, was reaching for a brownie. Clara saw him flinch, his head snapping up, his eyes wide with surprise. She knew, with a sickening certainty, that he had just heard her whisper too. And then she felt the phantom voice in her own ear, but it was speaking in the past tense, telling her what it had just told him. The woman getting the coffee. She writes articles no one reads and tells her family she's a successful journalist, but she's a month away from being evicted. The words struck her with the force of a physical blow. It was her deepest, most private shame, the secret she barely admitted to herself, let alone the world. It was the gnawing fear that defined her existence, and the automat had plucked it from her mind and served it up to a complete stranger as casually as a slice of pie. She looked at the student. He was staring at her, his face a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. In his eyes, she saw her own reflection, the way she looked at the woman in the blue coat, at the embezzler, at the man with the briefcase. The power, the omniscience, the delicious thrill of knowing. It was all a lie. She wasn't a secret keeper. She was just another piece of gossip. The gilded horn wasn't a charming relic. It was a parasite. It fed on the hidden vulnerabilities of everyone who entered, weaving them together in a toxic tapestry of suspicion. It didn't cure loneliness. It weaponized it, turning strangers into judges and private pains into public entertainment. Clara backed away from the wall of secrets, leaving her coffee untouched in its compartment. She walked out of the restaurant and back into the anonymous alley, the knowing glances of the other patrons following her like accusations. She took a deep breath of the cool, grimy city air. It tasted real. She was still a freelance writer on the verge of eviction. She was still lonely. But the loneliness, it was hers. The secret was hers. And in a city of 8 million stories, she would rather be an unknown author than a character in someone else's cruel whisper. Now, Charlie Cable was a man made of blueprints and quiet disappointments. An architect by trade, he possessed a brilliant eye for the soul of a building, but lacked the sharp elbows required to navigate the industry. His designs, full of elegant lines and thoughtful spaces, were consistently cannibalized by senior partners, his name relegated to a footnote on projects that were born in his mind. His life was a quiet commute between a sterile apartment and a glass and steel office, a daily pilgrimage through the city whose stony heart he understood better than its living inhabitants. His only confidant was made of granite. It was a gargoyle, one of a dozen perched on the cornice of a pre-war co-op overlooking Gramercy Park. While its brethren were standard grotesques, leering demons and snarling beasts, this one was different. It was carved in the shape of a winged hound, its head cocked in an attitude of perpetual listening, its stony face etched with a look of mournful intelligence. Charlie, on his lonely evening walks, found himself stopping beneath it, his gaze traveling up the 7 stories of ornate brickwork. He started talking to it, first in a self-conscious whisper, then in a low conversational murmur. He named it Abraxas. He told Abraxas about his frustrations at work, about the credit stolen for his design of the new gallery atrium. He complained about the city's relentless noise, the casual cruelty of strangers, the aching void of his own solitude. The gargoyle, of course, never answered, but its silent, unblinking vigil was a comfort. It was a better listener than anyone Charlie knew. It had seen a century of city life unfold beneath its perch. It could surely bear the weight of his small, modern sorrows. The ritual became the anchor of his day. They went with a cheaper steel, Abraxas, he'd sigh, shaking his head. It completely compromises the tension of the cantilever. Or, I saw a woman today on the train reading a book of poetry. I wanted to ask her about it, but, well, you know. The gargoyle simply listened, its stony ears deaf to the traffic, but Charlie, imagine, perfectly attuned to him. One rain-slick Tuesday night, Charlie's world fractured. He had just left the office, his spirit scraped raw. A younger, more aggressive architect named Randall had presented Charlie's meticulously crafted plans for a library renovation as his own, receiving a round of applause while Charlie stood silently in the back of the conference room. Defeated, he walked his usual route, his portfolio clutched under his arm like a shield. He didn't even have the heart to stop and talk to Abraxas. He was cutting across the dimly lit side street when 2 figures emerged from the shadows. It was brutally fast. A shove from behind sent him sprawling, the rough pavement tearing at his hands and knees of his trousers. One of them pinned him down while the other wrenched the portfolio from his grasp. "Wallet, too, old man," a voice rasped. Numbed with shock and humiliation, Charlie complied. They took it and vanished into the darkness, leaving him bruised, bleeding, and utterly alone on the wet pavement. The loss of the money was a sting, But the theft of his portfolio was a deep, eviscerating wound. Those plans were his soul on paper. He limped home, each step an agony of failure. He fumbled for his keys at the entrance to his brownstone, his hands shaking. As he was about to put the key in the lock, a sound from above made him freeze. It was a heavy, scraping noise, a sound of immense weight dragging across metal. He looked up at his fire escape and couldn't believe what he saw. Perched on the railing outside his third-floor window, silhouetted against the hazy glow of the city, was Abraxas. It was impossible. It was a creature of nightmare and fantasy. Its granite wings were folded, its powerful hound-like body tense, and its intelligent, mournful eyes were fixed on him. It was no longer a statue. It was now alive. Charlie stumbled backward, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. The gargoyle shifted its weight, the fire escape groaning in protest. Then, with a deliberate, almost gentle movement, it extended a massive stone claw. Held within its grip, torn and crumpled, but unmistakably his, was the portfolio. Beside it, tucked securely between two talons, was his wallet. A wave of dizzying, terrifying understanding washed over him. Abraxas had not just listened, the gargoyle had acted. Slowly, as if in a trance, Charlie went inside and climbed the stairs to his apartment. He unlocked his door and opened it. The gargoyle was still there, waiting. He unlatched the window, and with a sound of grinding stone, the creature squeezed its enormous form through the opening and landed with a floor-shuddering thud in his living room. It was a surreal sight. An ancient mythical guardian standing beside a minimalist IKEA coffee table. The gargoyle deposited the portfolio and wallet on his rug, then settled into a crouch, its stony gaze following Charlie's every move. He was its charge. The next few days were a blur of fear and wonder. Charlie called in sick to work, too terrified and awestruck to leave his apartment. He discovered that the gargoyle didn't eat or drink, but seemed to draw sustenance from the city's ambient energy, becoming almost perfectly still during the day and more alert at night. Its presence was a constant, silent, and incredibly heavy reality. But something else was happening to Charlie. The fear was slowly being replaced by a strange, unfamiliar feeling. Confidence. He was no longer just a lonely architect. He was a man with a gargoyle. The silent, unwavering loyalty of the creature in his living room was a powerful balm to his lifetime of insecurities. On Friday, he returned the portfolio to his briefcase and went to work. He walked into the office not with his usual timid shuffle, but with a straight back and a steady pride. He walked directly to Randall's desk, where the younger man was laughing with a colleague. "Randall," Charlie said. His voice was calm, but it cut through the office chatter. "Those library plans. You and I both know they're mine. You're going to tell the partners the truth, or I will." Randall scoffed. "You don't have the guts, Cable." Charlie leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. "You have no idea what I have. Give me back my work." There was something in Charlie's eyes that Randall had never seen before. A flinty, unshakable certainty, a hint of a power that was ancient and absolute. The younger man's smug expression faltered. He looked away, unnerved. That afternoon, a sheepish Randall confessed his plagiarism to the partners, and the library project was rightfully returned to Charlie. That evening, Charlie walked home a new man. He didn't stop at the building by the park. He didn't have to. He opened the door to his apartment, and there sat the gargoyle, waiting for him, its stony face tilted in that familiar, listening way. The pedestal on the old co-op stoop was still empty, a blank space in the city skyline that now only he understood. He was no longer lonely. He had a friend, a guardian, a secret made of stone. And in the heart of this great indifferent city, that was more than enough. Anna's life in Hell's Kitchen was a fortress of practicality. She was a medical archivist, a woman who spent her days imposing order on the chaotic narratives of human ailments. Her apartment was a testament to this principle. Minimalist, tidy, and quiet. The city, with its roaring, unpredictable energy, was something to be kept on the other side of her double-paned windows. But a small, persistent loneliness had begun to breach her defenses. So she decided to create a world she could control. A garden. The rooftop of her building was a flat, tarred wasteland, but a small corner of it caught the afternoon sun. She hauled up bags of soil and terracotta pots, her sensible plan laid out like a patient's chart. Tomatoes for substance, basil for flavor, mint for tea. It was to be a small, orderly patch of green, a predictable harvest. But the city, it seemed, had other plans. A few weeks after her sensible plans had taken root, interlopers began to appear. These weren't the usual, scraggly city weeds. One was a vine that grew tiny bell-shaped flowers the color of dusk. When the wind blew, they produced a faint melodic chiming, like a distant wind chime. Another was a low, leafy bush whose dark green leaves were always warm to the touch, radiating a gentle, steady heat. A third was a fern that grew not in a chaotic spray, but in a perfect, mesmerizing spiral, its fronds unfurling with mathematical precision. Anna, in her practical way, was annoyed. She decided to uproot them, but their roots were stubbornly, unnaturally deep. Defeated, she decided just to let them be, a small pocket of chaos in her otherwise orderly world. Then the miracles began. They were small, almost unnoticeable, and deeply unhelpful. Anna was a creature of habit who prided herself on her organization, yet she was constantly misplacing her keys. One day, after the chiming vine appeared, she found herself patting her pockets in a familiar panic outside her door, only for the keys to simply be there, nestled in the very pocket she had just checked. It happened again the next day, and the day after that. It wasn't that she stopped losing him. It was that they started finding her. Her pre-war apartment was a symphony of drafts, the pilot light on her ancient stove a fickle, sputtering thing. But after the warm-leafed bush took root on the roof, her apartment became inexplicably cozy. The pilot light now burned with a flame as steady and unwavering as a prayer candle. The world, it seemed, was being subtly, chaotically rearranged around her. She started finding things among the planters, not trash, but offerings. A single perfect, unblemished bay leaf, a thimbleful of what smelled distinctly of good Irish whiskey, a tiny, exquisitely polished river stone. One afternoon, while watering her tomatoes, she saw a flicker of movement. Huddled beneath a warm leaf was a small creature, no bigger than her hand. It looked like a tiny, wizened old man with a long, tangled beard, dressed in what looked like a miniature burlap sack. It met her gaze for a split second, its eyes ancient and wary, before vanishing. She spent the next week at the public library, not archiving medical histories, but diving into folklore and mythology. The pieces began to click into place. The chiming plant, she read, was a favorite of the Lares, Roman household gods who protected entryways and found lost things. The warm leaves belonged to a plant sacred to Hestia, the Greek goddess of the hearth. The wizened creature was a dead ringer for a domovoi, a Slavic hearth spirit. Her garden wasn't just a garden, it was a sanctuary. In the vast sterile desert of concrete and glass, her small patch of living soil was an oasis for the city's forgotten deities, the minor gods of the windowsill, the spirits of the threshold, the tiny deities of the pantry, all the small immigrant gods who had traveled to this new world in the hearts of their people, only to find themselves homeless in apartments with no hearths, in buildings with no cellars, in a world that had forgotten how to believe in them. A strange, protective tenderness bloomed in Anna's chest. She was no longer just a gardener. She was a custodian. She began leaving offerings of her own. A saucer of milk, a piece of bread, a spoonful of honey. In return, the unhelpful miracles continued. Her shoelaces never came untied. The perfect avocado was always at the top of the pile at the grocery store. A cab would always appear on a rainy day. It was a small, strange, and deeply comforting symbiosis. The real test, though, came in late August. A hurricane, a monstrous swirling beast, was barreling up the coast. The city braced for impact. News anchors spoke in grave tones of devastating winds and flooding. For Anna, the abstract threat was a visceral, personal terror. It wasn't her apartment she was worried about. It was the small, fragile world on her roof. She spent the day before the storm in a frantic, hopeless effort. She tried to tie the larger plants down with twine. She built a pathetic little wall of spare bricks. She even considered trying to bring them all inside, but she knew they wouldn't survive in the sterile, lightless environment of her apartment. They belonged to the sky. As the wind began to pick up, she could feel a palpable hum of anxiety from the roof, a collective thrum of divine fear. That night, as the storm hit, the city screamed. The wind howled through the canyons of Hell's Kitchen, and the rain came down in solid, blinding sheets. Anna sat in her apartment, listening, her hands clenched, feeling utterly helpless. But on the roof, a quiet, chaotic miracle was taking place. The tiny bell-shaped flowers on the vine began to chime, not with a gentle melody, but with a frantic, discordant clang. A furious gust of wind, a vortex that should have torn the planters from the roof and sent them spinning into the street below, was inexplicably deflected, splitting around her small garden as if it had hit a solid, invisible wall. The warm-leafed bush began to glow, emitting a soft, radiant heat that created a strange, localized pocket of warmth. The torrential, freezing rain hit the invisible heat shield and turned to steam, preventing the soil from becoming a drowning torrent of mud. The spiral fern began to vibrate, a low, resonant hum. The pots, which should have been sliding and crashing into each other, instead nudged and shifted with a strange, gentle precision, huddling together for stability, finding the most secure footing on the slick, tarred roof. It was not a grand, singular act of divine power. It was a clumsy, desperate collaboration, 100 tiny, unhelpful miracles, for once, working in perfect, life-saving harmony. The next morning, the storm was gone. The city was a wreck. Sirens echoed in the distance. Anna climbed the stairs to the roof, her heart heavy with dread, expecting to find nothing but broken pottery and shredded leaves. Instead, she found her garden. It was not just intact, it was radiant. The leaves were washed clean, the colors vibrant, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and ozone. It was a small, impossible island of peace in the city's wreckage. Anna stood there for a long time, watching the sun rise over the bruised and battered skyline. She was no longer a lonely archivist. She was the keeper of a sacred place. She went downstairs, filled a small saucer with milk, and brought it back up to the roof, placing it gently among the chiming flowers and glowing leaves. A tiny, bearded face peeked out from behind a tomato plant, and for the first time, it didn't vanish. It watched her, and in its ancient eyes, she saw not gratitude, but a simple, profound acknowledgement. They were home, and so, at long last, was she. Paul's world had shrunk to the size of a cracked phone screen. At 17, he had mastered the art of the cynical slouch, the dismissive eye roll, the weary sigh of a man who had seen it all and been profoundly unimproved by the experience. Wonder was a currency he no longer traded in. It was for kids, for tourists, for the suckers who still believed in things. His parents, in a last-ditch effort to reconnect him with the world, had dragged him to New York City, a place whose relentless energy only amplified his own sense of detachment. One night, after a particularly grating family dinner filled with forced cheerfulness, he slipped out of their hotel. He walked without purpose, his earbuds blasting a wall of sound that kept the city at bay. He ended up at the southern edge of Central Park, a dark sleeping giant in the heart of the metropolis. On a dare to his own apathy, he found a low section of the wall and vaulted over it, landing softly on the damp grass. The park at night might as well have been a different country. The familiar paths were transformed into mysterious, winding trails. He wandered deeper, drawn by a faint, tinkling music he could just barely hear beneath the bass line in his ears. He found its source in a clearing, the Central Park Carousel, silent and still under the pale glow of the security lights. It was a beautiful, anachronistic thing, a relic of a simpler time. He scoffed at the garishly painted horses, frozen mid-prance, their glass eyes staring blankly into the darkness. It was all so childish, so sentimental. He found a spot on a nearby bench, pulled his hoodie low, and let the city's ambient hum lull him into restless sleep, the carousel a monument to everything he felt he had outgrown. He was awoken by a sound that did not belong, a soft, rhythmic clopping on the pavement. He sat up, rubbing his eyes his heart giving a sudden, nervous lurch. The carousel was no longer still. The horses, all 57 of them, had stepped down from their golden poles. They were walking, pacing, their painted hooves making a soft, percussive sound on the concrete plaza. They were alive. Paul stared, his cynical armor cracking, his mind scrambling for a rational explanation. It was a dream. It had to be. One of the horses, a magnificent black steed with a wild flowing mane and eyes that glittered like obsidian, trotted over to him. It stopped a few feet away and lowered its head. A voice, not of words, but of pure thought, echoed in Paul's mind. It was a voice that sounded like old wood and peeling paint, like the laughter of 1,000 children. "You are lost," the horse communicated. "You have dropped something. We can help you find it." I haven't dropped anything," Paul stammered, his voice sounding thin and reedy. "Yes, you have," the horse insisted. "All children lose things in the park. A favorite toy, a single glove, a balloon that slips from the fingers. We are the guardians of these things, but you have lost something far more important." Before Paul could protest, the black horse knelt, a clear invitation. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but a deeper, long-forgotten curiosity held him fast. Hesitantly, he climbed onto the horse's smooth painted back. As soon as he was seated, the entire herd began to move, not towards the park exits, but deeper into the darkness, a silent, ghostly cavalry. The ride was terrifying and exhilarating. They moved with a supernatural speed and grace, the familiar landscape of the park transforming into a mythical wilderness. They galloped through the ramble, its winding paths becoming a labyrinth where whispers of forgotten fairy tales clung to the leaves. They passed the lake, and Paul saw that the water was not reflecting the city lights, but a sky filled with 1,000,000,000 unfamiliar stars. The black horse took him to a place he'd never seen, a small hidden grove where hundreds of red balloons were tangled in the branches of an ancient oak tree. "Every child who has ever let go of a string," the horse explained. "Their small, fleeting sorrows. Do you feel them?" Paul did. He felt a wave of gentle, childish sadness wash over him, the simple, pure grief of a lost treasure. He remembered a blue balloon his father had bought him at a fair when he was 5. He cried for an hour when he had let it go. The memory, so distant and trivial, was suddenly sharp and poignant. It was the first genuine feeling he had had in years. Next, they rode to Belvedere Castle. But the castle was no longer a charming folly. It was a grand, soaring fortress, and from its highest turret, a flock of paper airplanes circled endlessly in the wind. "They're dreams," the horse said. "The ones they folded and threw to the sky, full of hope for whatever they would become. An astronaut, a hero, a painter." Paul remembered a detailed drawing of a spaceship he had made in the 4th grade, complete with schematics for a faster-than-light engine. He had truly believed he would build it one day. The raw, uncomplicated ambition of that boy felt like a punch to the gut. Where had that kid gone? When had he traded his spaceship for a cynical slouch? Their final stop was at the carousel itself, but it was different now. It was lit with a warm, golden light, and the calliope was playing its cheerful, tinkling tune. And on the platform, dancing and laughing, were children. They were translucent, ghostly, but their joy was solid and real. They were spirits of every child who had ever ridden the carousel, their happiest moments preserved in a timeless, joyful loop. Paul watched them, feeling a profound ache in his chest. He saw a little boy with a gap-toothed grin, riding the black horse. His face was alight with pure, unadulterated wonder. The boy was him. "This is what you have lost," the horse's thought was soft, almost a whisper. "Not your balloon, not your spaceship. This, the simple, shining thing. The belief that the world can be magical." Tears streamed down Paul's face, hot and unfamiliar. He was crying for the boy on the horse, for the lost dreams in the castle, for the small sorrows in the trees. He was grieving for the wonder he had so carelessly discarded. He slid off the horse's back and stood before the spinning, magical carousel. The black steed and its brethren were already walking back to their places, their forms becoming stiff and painted once more. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a gray light over the city. The magic was receding with the darkness. Paul walked out of the park as the first joggers began their morning ritual. The city was the same. The people were the same. But he was different. The world, which had seemed so gray and small, suddenly felt vast and full of unseen possibilities. He looked at the towering skyscrapers, not as oppressive blocks of steel, but as man-made mountains, monuments to a collective, audacious dream. He heard the cacophony of the traffic, not as noise, but as the city's chaotic, vibrant song. He still had his phone in his pocket, but for the first time in a long time, he felt no urge to look at it. He didn't need to. The world right in front of him was finally, dazzlingly, enough. Well, friends, the stories are told, the whispers fade back into the city's hum, but the magic doesn't vanish. It's still there, waiting in the quiet places. The angel is still watching from the library ceiling. The carousel horses are still guarding their lost dreams. The city's pulse beats on, a rhythm of steel, steam, and secrets. Perhaps now you'll see it too. You'll wonder about the melody drifting from a subway platform, or the strange sudden luck of finding a lost wallet. You'll look at a gargoyle and see not just stone, but a silent watcher. You'll feel the weight of 1,000,000 forgotten memories in the air and know that you're never truly alone. New York is a city of stories, and its greatest secret is that it's inviting you to become a part of one. All you have to do is pay attention. The next strange tale could be waiting for you at the next corner, on the next ferry, or in the blink of a one-eyed cat. Just be prepared to pay the toll. I'm Steve Stockton. Thanks for listening.